The levees are broken. I am your host, Kavan Bordelon. We are going to do everything we can to give you the information that you might not see everywhere else, because these things that we are going to cover, well, they are important. Not like the people here in the Top Secret Podcast lair, including myself. We have at the bar, who just rang the bell, who apparently is owning the bar, Grant Galatas of William S. Call Jewelers. Grant, it's a pleasure to have you in. Hopefully you're having fun here after hour one.
It's always a blast. Hands down.
Appreciate it. And then, of course, in the chair like mine, he is one of 15 master tobacconists in the world. He is the certified wizard of tobacco. He is Rene Girard of Piper's Haven.
Hi. The chair is comfortable. I like this chair.
Okay. Anyway. And then, of course, we've got our producer. He is Walker Griffon. Walker, I know that, like, you have your own camera now, and you talk less now that you have the camera than you did before you had the camera.
I don't know. Couldn't tell you why.
My point, you're making it for me. All right. So before we dive into some of the stories that the mainstream media in the U.S. might not be telling you, we do want to talk about our cigar of the month. Renee, what's going on in the world of cigars, and what cigars should maybe we be looking at this
There's
month?
all kinds of stuff going on. I have multiple things going on right now. Last time we talked about the Room 101 15th anniversary. We still have some of those. But since then, Cohiba's come out with a new one that's a limited production. The Series M Azul, that's a one time a year.
Is it blue?
How did you guess?
No, is the cigar actually blue is my question.
No, the band is. And the box is.
Okay.
But that's why they call it.
I was going to say, do they dye it blue? I mean, are we talking some methylene blue in the cigar?
No. It's the box and the band. But yes, Cohiba does this once a year. It's called the M series, and then every year it's a different blend. Those just came out, and we had 2 boxes. I got less than a box, but I got 3 more coming, and that's it, done.
Is that the trend in the cigar world right now, which is they're doing limited runs to keep people coming back for different flavors?
It seems like more and more factories are starting to do that. They'll do a limited thing. Sometimes they'll do 2 limited releases a year. They'll do one in the spring, one in the fall, and it's a one and done. That's it. Because they might only have so much tobacco. You know, it's a limited amount of tobacco, so they'll come up with a blend. They'll make X number of cigars, and that's it. No more. We can't duplicate that tobacco, so it's done.
It's interesting because I think there's a strong correlation to the whiskey world there.
Yeah.
I think what you're starting to see, and it started, in my opinion, it started with soft drinks. It started with the Coca-Colas of the world.
Oh, yeah, the flavored, yeah.
The very
limited
first one,
release.
The very first one that I remember was, what it was, a tropical Sprite or something like that.
Yeah.
Where they came out and it kind of tasted like Skittles dissolved in a soft drink, and Lord knows what was in it.
And they did one run of it, and then that's it.
They did it for a certain amount of time, and then it disappeared.
Right.
And I have to wonder because they're not going to grow organically at the rate they used to grow. Same thing's happening in whiskey right now.
Right. Yeah.
The whiskey market in the U.S. is not going gangbusters like it was 2-3 years ago.
No. Well,
specifically bourbon.
2 or 3 years ago, we were all stuck at home. All we could do was smoke cigars and drink whiskey because we couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't eat out. You couldn't go to work. A lot of people working from home, and all of a sudden, mysteriously, the video on their Zoom didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Because they were sitting there smoking cigars, drinking whiskey while they were working. So,
Oh, Renee, let me ask an uninformed question. And could environmental factors affect the crop?
Oh, definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
So you don't have to worry about that with the whiskey, but yeah, if you have
no.
runs
You
on
still got
cigars.
No, with a whiskey, you still got to worry about that because the ingredients they make that whiskey out of is an agricultural crop. But then also, once you distill it, you put it in that barrel, there's temperature, humidity, all kinds of things that can affect that whiskey.
Yeah, but those ingredients for whiskey, I would think, be a little more abundant than something specifically grown.
No, because a lot of these whiskeys, they still use certain varieties of corn or grains. It's just like in tobaccos. They hybridize a lot of the tobaccos they use, and that varies. And, you get a mold infestation or some type of fungus, or even in the aging process, they lose tobaccos. And I'm sure whiskey goes through the same thing.
Grant, what you are seeing with whiskey right now is actually really interesting because the whiskey market, when you think about where we were a couple of years ago,
Yeah. It was getting depleted.
well, not only was it depleted, whiskey was really, really big. Bourbon was hot and popular. So you had a lot of things that were allocated and stuff being held back. So what did they do 2019, 2018? They started producing more and more and more and distilling more and more and more and throwing it into barrels. They were building additional rick houses to store it, to age it, building all this stuff. So let's do some math.
Now there's a glut.
We're in 2025, 6 years from 2019,
Yeah.
which means that sweet spot that we talk about on bourbon, we really like an 8, a 10-year, a 12-year bourbon. We're not far from that. But if you produce a rye where 6 years is really that sweet spot, now all of a sudden you're starting to see all of that supply that was created
Come to
market. And now demand, while still really healthy, it's maybe not what it was because of strength of the economy, because of all of this other stuff.
See, what I'm wondering now is, are some of these distillers going, well, we were going to release this at 6. Let's wait till 7, 8, 9, 10 and slow down the distillation on what they're making now.
They will do some of that. Some of the other side of what they'll do is they'll keep distilling now and they'll say, we're going to hold on to this so that we can release it as a 12-year instead of a 8-year bourbon.
Right.
Because we're going to lose some bottles in the aging process as things evaporate in the barrel.
Right.
But instead of getting $40 a bottle, $50 a bottle, for an 8-year, we're going to ask $90 or $95 a bottle.
And they'll get it once, but if that liquor doesn't produce or the consumer doesn't see that value, they're going to stop buying that. So they got to be very careful.
Which is why, if you look back a couple of years ago, Buffalo Trace did not release any George T. Stag. They did not release it. My understanding is the only difference between a bottle of what is called George Stag, used to be Stag Jr., and George T. Stag is that there is a taster there who says, oh, I tasted this and his palate is good. And he says, this is Stag Jr., this is George T. Stag Jr. would sell for $60, $70 a bottle, retail at the time. George T. sells for $130, $140 at the time.
Right.
So what did they do? Nothing lived up to muster this year. We are not releasing George T. Stag, and they restricted supply, which meant that whatever was out there, the price went through the roof. So that continued release of unique releases is, to me, just where any type of consumable industry has to go at a certain point, because growth of new drinkers, just it's not there. Growth of new smokers maybe isn't there. But getting this people who do smoke to buy 3 or 4 extra cigars a year, getting the people who do drink whiskey to buy 4 or 5 extra bottles a year.
And we have seen that with the limited run cigars. Guys will call me and say, hey, are these in yet? Because, I mean, the word gets out on the street that this is getting released soon. So they'll call me, you got any? You got any? You got? And finally, when I say, yeah, I got them, how many can we get? How much money you got? I'll sell.
We've talked about this with whiskeys before. I mean, it can be very economically strategic. You know, if you make it sound like something that...
You mean price fixing? I mean, that's what it is.
If it's a limited release and then all of a sudden it just is not around anymore, people assume that it's not around anymore just because of its popularity. So if they release it at some point and then all of a sudden they hold back on it, like you said, Stag all of a sudden said, we're not putting any of this out right now.
Buffalo Trace,
and that made people go, oh, why? And as soon as you do release it, it's just, it goes through the roof.
Or when you do release it, instead of it being $120 a bottle, it's now $170 a bottle.
Yeah.
Economically strategic.
And then if it
price
doesn't,
fixing.
and then if it doesn't, if it doesn't sell at 170,
it'll come down.
Yeah,
Agreed.
They'll they'll adjust it.
Agreed.
You
And the big thing is you better get it while you can.
Yes.
And here's why, because we are very rapidly approaching, and we actually saw this. Please, again, don't believe us. Ask this question. We saw this happen to an individual in Great Britain, where when I say get it while you can, I don't mean get it while there's supply. I mean get it while they, the mysterious they, those who want to control other people, while they allow you to.
Yes. Your ability to get it.
This gentleman goes to a bank, and I believe he was going to buy a dirt bike for his son or something of this nature.
$2,250.
Yep. And he says, I want to take out $2,500. And the bank said, why? And his response was exactly what it should have been, which was, that's not your business. Who do you think you are?
It's my money.
Because it's none of your business. And they said, we're not releasing your money to you because you're not telling us why. Because now the British government says, if you can't tell us why you're taking this money out, we don't have to give it to you.
Even though it's
your
money. Yes. Well, I mean, and it goes back to, the government keeps talking about going to cryptocurrencies and cashless societies. And what do you think happens there? Because in credit cards, we've already seen that. Caleb and I both have experienced that.
Here's the really interesting side of this. And I'd love to get into this crypto discussion. I've actually reached out to a couple of people who know much more about crypto than I ever will. They've forgotten more about crypto than I'll ever know, much like you know more about tobacco and cigars than I'll ever know. You've forgotten more than I'll ever know. Grant, you and jewelry, you're the same way. I'm looking for somebody, and I've got a couple people who are on the radar to talk about crypto in this way. But this is the one thing that I have noticed over time. One of the policies that came out in the last 70 days, which, by the way, if you go back roughly 70 days, it puts you somewhere around January 20th, was we will not have a CBDC, a central bank digital currency. In other words, by executive order, it has been told here in the United States that the Federal Reserve Bank, privately owned, we don't own it, it's not part of our government, the Federal Reserve Bank will not be allowed to produce its own digital currency. I believe we will see, I don't know, a cashless society. I think we'll always have some cash.
I would hope so.
But I do believe that we will see a blockchain society. Blockchain is what is being implemented now in cryptocurrencies. So, for example, there are blockchains that are very difficult to decipher who is doing what. In other words, you don't have transparency on it, i.e. Bitcoin. So what's being bought and paid for with Bitcoin? Drugs, guns, people. That's where Bitcoin is being heavily used as a transactional medium, which is what money is supposed to be. Right? A blockchain technology consists of layer upon layer upon layer of encryption that is also publicly seen and transparent. So in other words, what you have in the transaction is a transaction that is virtually, I'm not going to say unhackable, but it's really difficult to hack even for the new quantum computing. Matter of fact, one of the big blockchain networks out there, which is Ripple, the CEO actually said, for us to actually deal with the quantum computing breakthroughs where they've talked about all of your passwords going in the last couple of weeks, he said some of the bigger cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, according to him, they can't deal with it. For the Ripple network, it's an update to be able to deal with it. It's a quick patch and it's done. So what I think you're going to see, personal, is Ripple is a private company. It is a company that is out there that has said, here's the number of coins we've got. It's not the government.
And they don't have, Ripple is a processor, not
Correct.
They don't own it, or they don't produce their own.
No, they do.
Digital. Oh, they have their own digital.
But here's the rules that I think we're going to see. They have their own digital currency. What's really interesting is, I think one of the rules we're going to see is when you produce a digital currency, it has to be a finite amount. You cannot add to it.
Yeah.
You cannot continue to inflate it.
Yeah, because you
And it's
could
gotta
manipulate
be-
the value by.
And it's got to be on a public ledger,
Yeah.
not a governmental ledger. So if it's privately held, operating in the background, that is transparent, so you're not having criminal entities operate on it,
Right.
that also is basically real time. So if you move one of these currencies, it's 3 to 5 seconds. If you move Bitcoin, it's hours. Right now, if you try to move something through the SWIFT network internationally, it's days, weeks, months. So what I think you'll see is I think you're going to see partnerships from really big companies. We're already hearing about companies like American Express, Bank of America. We're hearing about companies like Fidelity wanting to partner with Ripple to create these token funds where they say, we've got 40,000 troy ounces of gold. We're going to tokenize this and we're going to let people buy it. But this is how you digitally buy it, and it's yours on the ledger. I think that's what we're going to see. So I think you're going to eventually see an American Express card where you can pay with crypto.
Yeah.
I think that is what you will see. And because it is not beholden to a government, it is a public entity or a private entity, you're going to avoid the debanking issues that I think we're running into where you go into a bank and you're like, I want my $2,500.
Nope.
And they say, nope, because the government said so.
We don't want you to have that item that you're going to buy.
And you turn into all of a sudden the paper boy from Better Off Dead, where you're like, I want my $2. And you're trying to track everybody down to get your $2.
Right.
But like you said earlier, it's almost transactionally like on a quantum level.
It has to be.
Yeah.
It has to be.
That quick, that definitive.
It
sender,
solves
receiver, done.
It solves a massive problem because these transactions are expensive globally. They're expensive. I mean, think about what it costs to process a transaction. And this, to me, is where the secret theft is in the world. And Walker, I know you gave me the finger. We're going to go a little long here. But this is where the real secret theft is. If you don't own a business, what you don't know is that if you pay with a debit card, one of the reasons that your bank charges you to have a checking account is because there are fees on the back end that you never see that go from one bank to another, from a processor to another. Literally, you have a middleman skimming millions, billions, trillions of dollars off of the U.S. economy simply because they are processing the transaction for that business. And by the way, if you live in Louisiana, you now see it because it used to be that as a business, you couldn't charge that to your customers.
Right.
Now you are seeing businesses where the business owner has taken the money and basically had to say, well, guess what? In order for me to stop my prices from going up, I'm going to charge you for the transaction fee. So now there's a credit card fee versus a cash fee.
Well, and that's a little bit different too, because a lot of if you use, for example, a Visa card, there's
different rate.
And there's a middleman
Yep.
that does all the transaction. Visa doesn't do anything. They charge, and then the middleman charges. But with the fee that you're talking about, most of the credit card processors now, they go to the merchant and says, you don't get charged any processing fees anymore. That 4% that's on the bottom of your deal, the processor's getting all of that.
Yep.
But most business owners are going, yeah, it doesn't cost me anything.
And I get to put 4% more in my pocket.
Well,
because you start jacking that up.
Actually, no, because most times, I mean, I don't pay nearly that amount, and that's why I refuse to do that. I don't charge anything.
I wouldn't advertise that, Renee.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Well, that's why I'm not saying what percentage it is, but that's why I refuse to go that route. I'll get calls all the time from processors going, we can fix it to where you pay zero. I said, yeah, and you're going to charge my customer 4% and keep the money. And I got to listen to him complain because there's an extra 4%.
Good for you for not letting them do that to your customer and letting the greed take over.
That's
right?
that's just the cost of doing business.
Cheers. We'll be back. Hour 2 of Implicit Bias Radio continues.